All right. Welcome, everybody. Inner World episode 14. But really, it's more like compared to other podcasts, we're 30 deep because these things are ginormous. So much more information and research. I had multiple listeners in the last month talk to me about how they get more out of these episodes than hundreds of episodes of other podcasts where people are just talking, out of their ass. There's nothing prepared. There's no legitimate research. And hey, I'm feeling it. I think we're the greatest out there. And I'm super excited to get into this particular conversation. We're talking about the hidden one, Aman. You ever wondered why? I asked my dad this question last night. You ever wonder why Christians say amen at the end of their prayer? Well, we're about to dig into that on a level that has probably never really been achieved before. Maybe ever, definitely not in podcast format. So it's going to be super awesome. Dylan, once again, thank you for initiating this topic. The gravy portal opened and it's flowed copiously. So how you doing, man? You ready to do this thing? What made you interested in this topic other than continuing looking at Taylor?
So the word Aman, if you just look at it from what they claim it's from, at least in Phoenician, and if you're going to claim that, all these languages descend from Phoenician, well, if you can read Etruscan, you can read Aman. It just looks like O-M-N. And that is literally closer to omen, especially if you're pronouncing it from those Latin mindsets, than Aman, Amun, like you'd find in Egypt, or amen, as they say now, or amen. So you can see, they filled in the E, so it's not present in the word. And that is allegedly the kingdom of Aman, which is near Phoenicia, or what is modern day Israel, that they call it. And they claim that a lot of this comes from this system, but comes from that region, but it doesn't. You can prove that it's demonstrable that it's from the Mediterranean, more Central Europe, Central European portion, specifically the peninsula of Italy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be found in these ancient cultures whose languages have zero affinity to the languages they're pretended to descend from. And that is where the crux of my argument and my work is demonstrating, is that the only thing that they have that is akin to it is the radicals. But that's what Jacob Bryant called the Amanian radicals. A radical is like the very base, quote unquote, root of the word. So like in Kyros, you saw the radical, the root is going to be Kyr, but the radical would be Ur. And so when you see these in all these different languages, it's this pattern that is indisputably connected. There's no way, there's too many things lining up for it to be coincidence, or just like random, or just human thought. I know there's only so many sounds the mouth can make. So that's why you get in a situation where certain things don't mean the same, but they sound the same, which is why phonetics are not something you can rely on. But there's something that can facilitate the process. And so the reason I wanted to get into this, aside from the fact that we're making our way through Robert Taylor's work, it's the Astronomical Theological Lectures. And this is kind of like a work that he did. I think it's after all of his books that he published while he was in prison. But when you see the quotes of this hidden one, the one that I included in the thumbnail that you'll see it says, "How long, Jove?" It's Psalm 89:46. And if you look at it, it's Yova. How long? It's not Lord, it's Jove. How long, Yova, Jehovah, will you hide forever? And this goes to the point where Jehovah is the sun and it hides in winter. Or depending on what portion of the year, there's a portion where it hides and the days are short, and it hides at night. And so there's all these themes and astrotheological stories encoding this in certain things like scripture and all that. And we're going to continue exploring that.
Yeah, buddy. I'm also feeling called to point out how interesting it is to make a distinction between roots and radicals when they're both from the same word, and which is radix, meaning root. Technically both words are, rad root, DT switch. It's actually a perfect example of within itself how two versions of a mouth sound mean the same thing with philological letter swaps. And the take we're going to bring to Christianity, as usual, might be seen as radical, but the truth of it is we're getting to the roots of where this system comes from. As always.
Also, I need to interrupt you because our boy George just went full time at Substack. I don't know what's going on in at Rockfin. Maybe you want to enucleate people on that matter, but basically, he just did an episode that published like a day or two ago, and one of the things he talked about was how in music, and especially the old, like the way it used to look when they'd write it out, it would start with Kyrie. And this is my fantasy art. So people on my Substack, this is what I'm cooking. I've got a story that I've never published that I'm doing. Check this out, dude. You like fantasy, right?
Oh yeah, high fantasy.
Yeah. So this is what I've been working on. The AI is getting amazing, and I've been creating this with the prompts, obviously, but the AI is still the one that does it. But yeah, so this is my first manuscript called Lodin's Wind. Look at how good that looks. It's wild what you can do. Anyways, George is talking about how this word Kyrie, which looks like Kyrie, it's literally Kyrio or Kiro or Kiron or Kyros, depending on the termination of the context. But that's the Greek word that Plutarch wrote in the 1st century. That's what the Persians called the sun. And we've done like basically our two previous episodes. You need to revisit this, but you even see it in the music. And so shout out
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So shout out it's
Third Eye Edified.
Third Eye Edify on Substack. Go subscribe. You can watch it for free. It's an amazing, amazing podcast. He gets into the music.
I'm not surprised he's shifting away from Rockfin. I also have stopped uploading anything new there. They kicked off friends of mine for no reason, and that was it. I was like, okay, we're done here. The amount of support I was getting through that platform was dwindling rapidly anyway, so no big loss. But yeah, okay, I want to start out with talking a little bit on the subject of esotericism, aka the hidden meaning in writing that is so prominent amongst the priest class, the philosophers, almost all authors of the Western canon in the ancient world up till probably just a few hundred years ago. So the ancients were extremely invested in hiding their true doctrines. Pretty much all their writings were esoteric in at least one way, if not multiple ways. There are many reasons for this amongst the priests and philosophers, and in some respects, esotericism actually served a necessary defensive purpose. It obscured the beliefs of the philosopher and helped prevent the superstitious masses from discovering the true beliefs of the philosopher or the priests, because they would likely have been persecuted for heresy or perceived atheism, particularly in the idolatrous societies who had fetishized the gods and their symbols, coming to believe in a mini gods system and losing sight of the one true God that these mini gods were supposed to be just a part of or like an expression of. So there was also esotericism that was meant to protect the society itself from truth. For example, the noble lie of Plato's Republic, which attempted to demonstrate that there are some truths that are destabilizing and harmful to the social order and are better left hidden. The best example of that, I think, is autochthony, which was the doctrine the Athenians held that their ancestors were born from the land that they occupied, with the tools and implements befitting their various castes already in hand. This was a useful lie in the sense that it obscured the troubling fact that all nations came to their lands through conquest, killing or displacing the previous peoples there. And this lie also provided a dogma to ensure the lower caste people would be more likely to accept their stations. The truth in this sense would be harmful to the functioning of their society because it would create unrest amongst the lower caste people. And then all of the various ways that the interconnectedness of society relied on people doing their job, even if it wasn't the job they wanted to do, could be disrupted and things would fall apart. Esotericism was also instructive because many wise authors of the past believed, and I think they're probably right about this, that simply telling a student the answers, especially through writing, was more harmful than helpful. But leaving breadcrumbs to be deciphered would bring the student into true wisdom and knowledge because they'd have to reason things out for themselves. Proverbs 25:2 states, "It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter." So the hidden nature of God is perhaps God's most definite feature. In all, of all, but no one thing is itself God. Given this obvious truth, it makes sense that those who sought to serve God would also attempt to emulate the tendency of God to hide and conceal things. So following this, I have a lot of great quotes from authors and philosophers of the past on the subject, but I figured you might want to weigh in.
Just really quick. So you're talking about like the Greeks, and I've got an article that's publishing tomorrow, so it'll already be out by the time this comes out. But it talks about how that omphalos in like the Greek, the idea is the Greeks believed that their region was the center of the earth, and so that idea of omphalos, or which they mistranslated as navel or umbilical. It actually, people make the case, Jacob Bryant specifically, who is responsible for naming ammonium radicals or hidden radicals, if you will. And omphalos, he says, is from omph al, and it also appears as al omph. And al and el are the same word. This aleph lamed, that's al technically, but you'll see people like that's how Elohim starts. But you'll see it's actually technically AL, but they transliterate it as EL. Anyway, this means the oracle of God or the God oracle. So it's not the navel, it's the oracle of God. And that's why all these places named with this encoded in it, whether it's Omphal or Alomp, they all have oracles in those sacred locations. So that's.
Did I tell you that I have a ton of omphalos gravy later in the show?
No, you didn't. So so I didn't mean to jump the gun, but I just wanted to point that out. Like there is this massive Greek problem in the historical record, and you can't believe a culture is this prolific in how they write, yet that poor in how they come about concluding things. Anyways, it's neither here nor there, but just something to be aware of, especially how people base so much of their research on this idea of omphalos, meaning navel or center,
Well, we're going to come back to that, but I actually have pretty interesting evidence that the omphalos does represent this idea of a navel, but that doesn't actually contradict. It's like simultaneously what you're saying supports a lot of the evidence I'm bringing forward, particularly through artifacts, that it has to do with oracles. So
right, but
it's kind of I could actually see it as a both.
But in the historical context, if you look at the accounts, it is used in the context of being the center of the earth because they believe that they were the center of the world at that time. And there's context in the same historical record of the ancients that say like it was neither the center of the earth, and the umbilical is not the center of man, of the human body. And again, it goes back to that. The Hermetic principles are erroneous. And a lot of people have problems with me saying that, but they're more like poetical, right? Like the principle of correspondence, that as above, so below, as the inward, the outward doth from the inward roll, and in the most soul, I can't even remember. It's been so long since I said this or since I learned that. The idea that everything is reflective across all scales, it's cool and it's true in some cases, but it's not like the nature of reality. And so that comes about from the idea that, well, this is the center of the world and our navel is the center of our body because we're microcosms of the world, which is microcosms of God, all that stuff. That's where all this stuff, it gets incorporated. And that's what other historians in that time era say it's not true. So it's just something to be aware of. And all this will be sourced in my latest article when it comes out. But I just wanted to put that out there.
Cool. Well, as much as I'd like to engage in talking about that, all right,
other subjects at hand.
We got other subjects at hand, and we will return to the Omphalos with a lot of interesting stuff to consider there. But back to this concept of esotericism, the glory of God to conceal a thing. Some good quotes on the subject. We got Ovid. Bene vixit, bene qui latuit. He has lived well, who has remained well hidden. Or how about the motto of Epicurus and his followers? Live unseen. Or this is a particularly good one, considering his station. Bishop Synesius of Cyrene in the 4th century speaks of the need to love wisdom at home and to embrace fables abroad. I like that one.
I just need to correct myself real quick because I wasn't ready to say it. That. A lot of people translate that as within, so without, but it's the outward doth from the inward roll and the inward dwells in the inmost soul.
I think that there's legitimacy to that statement, but it's maybe not something we can perfectly.
No, for sure. Like it's useful for all the Hermetic principles are useful, but like it's not. Right? Like this metal isn't vibrating, the principle of vibration, all that. Like my table isn't moving. It's an inanimate object. There's just a lot of stuff like that you got to take with a grain of salt. That's all I'm saying.
I don't know. Take some mushrooms and you might see it vibrating. Okay. So, I have a larger section here from an author that I only recently came across, Charles Blount, who wrote in 1680 a work. What's that?
Blunt.
Blunt?
I'm assuming it's Blount.
Oh, okay, you'd say it as Blunt.
Yeah.
Okay, Charles Blount in 1680. Dylan's already familiar. He wrote, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." And there's this chapter on idolatry and sacrifices that I'm going to read a lot from here. Now, because the generality of men are not thus speculative or philosophical in their actions, but rather crafty and politic, as designing to themselves power amongst men, and by consequence riches and honor, the most nervous and effectual consideration of the Gentiles' sacrifices must be taken that way. Thus, when princes, who in the governing of mankind, found it to be an unruly creature, mischievous, and not capable to be guided by solid reason or truth, but totally subjected to the passions of hope and fear, how false and vain soever it mattered not, provided that things were well fitted and suitable to their capacities, wherefore they, to encourage obedience and good works, held forth gain and preferment, as on the other side, to deter from disobedience and mischief, they ordained forfeitures and disgrace. So basically, you do what they say, you get rewarded. You don't, you get punished, right? That's just part of the way that hierarchies work. He continues, yet in as much as abundans cautula non nocer, an abundance of caution does no harm, and seeing there were many clandestine villainies so secret and undiscoverable as could hardly be brought to an open conviction, for such the magistrate raised within them, amino tutore flagellum, aka a whip of torture in the mind, in their consciences the fear of some future punishment. Wherefore, for want of that true knowledge which we enjoy, they feigned some of their own inventions, such as the Stygian lake, aka hell, and the like, which, inasmuch as the goodness of God and their present invisibility rendered the less credible, therefore the declaring them to be with material fire, as also eternal, did in good measure overawe that incredulity. From whence we can observe how necessary and how natural is the belief of a reward and punishment hereafter, that even the unenlightened heathens, as well for conveniency as from the impulses of their own natures, were forced to acknowledge it. So rational and so natural is that article of our Christian faith. Now for the erecting of this tribunal in the minds of men, they, not being enlightened from above, made use of superstition, the offspring of too much honor and too much fear, which being to be managed cunningly and well fitting to vulgar capacities, they did little or not at all regard the satisfaction of clear, rational men. For first, the number of them is so small as they are of no power, and then they are too wise to hazard their own ruin for the instruction of foolish men, casting pearl before swine, knowing withal that if any man should be so vain as to oppose the common belief, the mob would, as they did by Socrates, oppress and decry him for an atheist. Therefore, the wisest among the heathens followed this rule in their converse. Loquendum cum vulgo, sentiendum cum sapientibus, and si mundus vult dicipiatur. Speak with the vulgar, think with the wise, and if the world wants to be deceived, let it be deceived. So he's making some interesting points here about human nature being the source of some of these beliefs of eternal reward and punishment, that whether or not there's scriptural reason to believe in such things, people tend to believe in them even before the age of Christianity. And that the wise men, even if they wanted to make a case for why that was not something the divine would ever do to its creations, would be not very well off to make that case. They might even be attacked for it, but they could profit from it if they just let people believe that, because it would keep society operating, again, like the castes I mentioned, more smoothly if people not only believed in rewards and punishments from their liege lords, but also from God himself. And I think that's maybe it was a little hard to understand his language, but I think that the meaning behind that is very profound, about human nature.
It's you just that last caveat you stipulated. It is like the core, remember how I wrote that book, Get Mad or Get Realistic? That is one of the most realistic quotes you'll ever hear. And it's one of the reasons that I've kind of withdrawn from the public space. And I just really kind of do this in my Substack, is because if you look at just human nature, I had an experience where I told somebody a couple months ago, I took them aside and I said, this, I'm telling you this now, and I want you to remember this. It was election stuff. I was like, remember this after the election. So when it happens, we had this conversation, and remember it right now. And I told them literally like a month or two later, dude had no recollection whatsoever. And so what you will see with people is they literally just hear what they want to hear. It's a fool's errand to try to reach people. And
speak with the vulgar, think with the wise. If the world wants to be deceived, let it be deceived.
And that's it. And that is going to be the hardest thing for a lot of people like us to come to terms with, is because there's an innate human nature to want to warn people that they're about to go off a cliff. And that would be the deception. And a lot of people want to be deceived, right? Look at all the, all the people that are now like celebrating the saving of people who were allegedly lost or stranded in a violation of the second law of thermodynamics, known as space. People want to be deceived. And you getting in the way of that is only going to bring hardship. It just is. And the sooner you recognize that, and sooner you realize, you know what? These guys sacrificed a lot of time to learn this valuable lesson. Maybe I just ought to pay attention to it and not make their mistakes. Because in my opinion, I think it was a mistake to be as eager to share this information, because I don't think people want to hear it, So now I'm just doing this for us. I'm doing this for us. This is for us.
It is for us and people on the other side of the paywall once we get to that point where the really deep gravy is. But speaking as your friend, I saw that it was like, it hurt you to be so passionate to get people to wake up to the truth and then them just fight you about it. You're way happier seeming now that you're doing things the way you're doing. And if nothing else, I think that's the value in it. So I want you to take us through quite a bit of your opening salvo here. Got some good stuff.
Awesome.
For the first.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that, because a lot of people will say, though, it's just like they always misquote stuff. That the context of what you just said, somebody needs to clip that just to remind them there is more to it than just let he who would be deceived, because that's what they'll say. It's an old Roman saying, but you just shared a little bit more expansive context of that. And it's not as bad as you think. It's not like, hey, we want people to be deceived. No, it's just, you can only do so much,
Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is because we're talking about the God who hides himself, Jupiter Ammon. A previous version of me would be coming to this through the context of like, the priests of the ancient world, they were just trying to hide the truth from people and control people. And they were the bad man. And now I'm like, I think they were wise.
Maybe they were on to something. Shit. Yeah, and and you know what it is we're just not on the right side of the equation. So for us, it feels like we're being deceived because nobody's letting us in on it,
But nothing stopped us from asking the questions and getting the answers. So that's the truth of it, is like, the truth is not ever hidden from you. God doesn't hide from you, except unless you don't look for God. If you look for God, God reveals. And
this is the real value, in my opinion, of the scriptures, is there's a lot of important life lessons. It's just not meant to be taken as a chronological record. And the reason being is, like, even in the scriptures, people could default to this. Well, it says, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing, and the honor of kings to seek out a matter. And that is the seek and ye shall find. That is the journey, is the reward part of seeking things out. So yeah, I agree that there's all this amazing stuff in the Bible that's valuable from a realistic learning how the world and how human nature works and how to operate within that. It's just not a historical text. And this next quote that Taylor started off with, I'm going to read, is another piece of invaluable realism, right? And it's from Jeremiah 5:30 through 31. And I quote, let me restart. Quote, an appalling and horrible thing befell earth. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule by their own hand, and my people love it so. What will you do at the end of it? So my initial reaction to that was, nothing has changed since the alleged time which this sentiment occurred. And, or if nothing has changed, if that's not the case, then it indicates that this sentiment is a modern one from the Middle Ages being passed off as an ancient sentiment. So that's why it appears nothing has changed, because we're still under that same system. And why would God, the creator of this world who can destroy and remake it, worry about priests and false prophets? Right? And so I asked, does this book of Jeremiah read like the word of God, or a concerned noble of a nation who is losing his power to the priesthoods, conquering it by preaching false prophecies to the gullible subjects of that nation? And I think that's what a lot of the early initial concerns about these therapeutae and monks and all that stuff, that's what it was, is they were rousing the quote unquote rabble, the vulgar, and getting them to believe in all this nonsense. And that was presenting a dangerous concern to the ruling class of that era, just like how the media puts out a bunch of false narratives and has half of their nations terrified. Like, remember like 4 years ago, it was all Trump, Russia collusion and all that bullshit. I literally had people, because I lived in Los Angeles, that were coming into work genuinely afraid. Oh my God, my president is colluding with communists in Russia. And they were literally psyched out, and because that's all they watched. They just watched this mainstream narrative bullshit. But that's the same thing, just at a different scale, a different time period, a different context. But that damaged them. Think of all the trauma they brought onto themselves that wasn't even true because somebody told them it was. And that's the problem that you have with these ancient priests. Now, the context of that passage is that these were the words of the quote unquote Lord. But if you look at how Lord is written, it's Yova or Hova. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's a appellation of Jupiter. And the root of that, or the radical, would be I-O or I-U, you, Pater, God the Father. So Yova is just like, it's a later rendering of that word. And so Reverend Taylor warned about that. He said, we must be heedful, never to confound the Lord with God. There is no necessary connection between them. They are not synonymous nor convertible terms, so that the one might be used indifferently for the other, but far from it, very far. The one is particular, the other general. As we say with propriety, the Lord, meaning particularly the figment with whom I am now to bring you acquainted, but could hardly say the God. So that the compound epithet, the Lord God, is a syncopation or abbreviated phrase of which the filling up is the Lord, who is a God. For while all nations had their gods, individual nations, sects, and clans, have ever had their particular conceits to which they adhered, subordinate to the general notion, so that it seemed but a fair bargain with Yaphtha proposed to the king of the children of Amun, wilt not thou possess that which Chemosh, thy God, gaveth thee to possess? So whomsoever the Lord our God shall drive out from before us, them will we possess. And that's Judges 11:24. For those who want to take a peek at my show notes, it's all included so you can see how it looks in all the languages. As you can see, it is admitted that Yova is not pronounced Jehovah, but Hova by the Latins, Jove, how we say in English, or Yova by Israelis. And it is derived from Hava, meaning to fall, which that would look like, if you were to spell it in English, H-A-V-A, or H-A-V-A-H, which is to become, to fall or to become. Both words appear the same as Eve, or He Vav He, which means life, Eva. They are all of them the same, separated only by context, which is why I'm taking so much time to hearken back to context regarding translations. Do you have anything you want to add, or should I keep going?
Oh, this is great. I'll
Awesome.
interject if I need to.
Okay, good. Just because I can't see you, so if your ways, so just interrupt me.
Sure, I'm happy to read any parts that you want me to take over too.
Yeah, read this. Taylor continued.
Here we see that Chemosh, that is the literal Hebrew for the sun, is synonymous with Aman, as each nation called themselves the children of the planet under whose protection they placed themselves, but God was the general term. Indeed, the bargain was not infrequently propounded to the particular conceit or tutelary genius under whose patronage they put themselves, that he should grant them success in war and comply with their request as the condition of his being their God, and under penalty of being turned away. So Jacob made his covenant and agreement upon the specific terms. If thou wilt keep me in this way that I go, and wilt give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely giveth the 10th to thee. Gonna just make a caveat there. That sounds exactly like a feudal lord, not a divine being. That's literally how a vassal would talk to their lord. Like, I'll do whatever you want as long as you keep me clothed and fed and provide me protection, and I'll pay you a tenth of my wages. It's a tax.
It's the classic tale or archetype of the sinner who is like, it just if you can just get me out of this mess that I've created for myself, then I'll go to church every Sunday, you know?
So Taylor continues, and there the chapter ends, leaving it to our own imaginations to fill up the evidently implied alternative of the covenant. But if I get any bad bread or have any sort of ill luck under your divine providence, look ye, my Lord God, never trust me if I don't send your godship packing, and try if I cannot strike a better bargain with the other gentlemen. Notwithstanding this ridiculous grossness of familiarity with their notion of the Lord, which appears in every page of the sacred text, our modern Jews, who claim a peculiar property in the Old Testament to which they have no right or title at all, would cheat the world into a notion that it is only from excess of reverence and from an overwhelming awe and veneration to be sure of the divine name that they substitute the word Adon-Naye, their utterance of the word Adonis, the name of the pagan god, the son of Venus, the name Adon or Adonius being the same as Baal, Baal-Saman or Bel, and literally signifying the Lord, with its pronoun suffix Adonai, literally our Lord, the name common to Jupiter, Bacchus, Pluto, Apollo, Asclepius, Hercules, Osiris, and all the grand personifications of the sun. Yet the name of Adonis is found in the sacred writings as distinctly different from that which our translators have rendered the Lord, as in that most marked and memorable passage, the first of the 110th Psalm, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou on my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. I want to add that this is a good time to recall when we did the episode about the Lord, that was 2 back, and revealed in so many facets that Jesus and Jehovah are one and the same. The prevalence of Adonai in the Old Testament, where the English rendering is the Lord, should require us to consider the mythology of Adonis more closely. The basic story of Adonis is Mira, the mother of Adonis, Mary, was driven out of her family after becoming pregnant and eventually changed into a myrrh tree, but still gave birth to Adonis. What were the gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus? Pretty sure one of them was myrrh. Aphrodite finds the newborn Adonis and takes him to the underworld to be fostered by Persephone. She returns for him once he's grown up and discovers him to be strikingly handsome. In some versions of this myth, Adonis is born from Mary, the myrrh tree, literally as a seed or kernel that falls to the ground and is buried or hidden one. Remember what he just said about Chemash or Hava, to fall, to become. And so this burying of the seed of the infant Adonis is a reference to the underworld journey of the sun, of course. And in some lore, Adonis even has a death and resurrection. So that's Jesus. And we're calling Jehovah Adonis, theoretically, in the Old Testament.
And then that forms that 4-letter magic, that forms the basis of the tetractys, which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see? And for those who don't know how to connect that with their mind, I'll do it, but keep going.
All right. Well, how about you take the next parts up into, God the Father hides during winter, etc.
That's how it connects. And so this ties into Pythagoras. And so when the point of all these things is there's no historical record of any of these people. They left no works behind. And Pythagoras is no different. Socrates, all that stuff. Anyhow, they're all using that sacred name, and it goes back way before, different origins than they're claiming. And even the first community of Pythagoreans is in Italy. I believe it was Campania, if I'm not mistaken. So Taylor continued, and the mystical tetragrammaton, or name of 4 letters or 2 syllables, Yahuwah, or I don't know. I don't know how I have no idea what he's doing with that word anymore. It's been so long since I chased that down. We absurdly pronounce Jehovah or Jehovah is found in the 68th Psalm, written but with two letters and necessarily requiring to be uttered, but as one syllable. Oh, that's why it's confusing. Yah. So he writes it out. Why, for the audience, he writes it out like Yahouh or something, but it's just Yah, or like Jah. It would just look like Yod He in Hebrew, or Jack, Yak, where certainly no irreverence is meant by that seemingly strange abbreviation. And then he quotes, "Sing unto God, sing praises to his name. Extol him that rideth upon the heavens by his name, Yah," which is God, literally, "and rejoice before him." And one of the things that's interesting about Adonis, before I continue, I put in a parentheses because we just talked about that. Really, the only culture that uses that in like context of it is the Italians, and like it's remnants of that system, Phoenician, whatever you want to call it, Etruscan, where that radical Don means Lord. Now, people say, well, what about the Spanish? I don't really consider it. Like when I'm talking about the sanction system, like the Italians can basically understand Spanish people. Like Italians can come to America and understand Mexicans because they're speaking a language that's from Italy. It's all derived from Latin. So when you see, Spaniards saying Lord Don Julio, right? Lord Julio, Don Quixote, right? Lord Quixote. That's all from Italy. It's from an Italian context. So yes, the Spaniards use it. Yes, you could make the case for other cultures using it. But when you trace it, I just like to provide context because my experience is people tend to hang on every little thing so they can say, gotcha. But Taylor wrote, so the Spaniards dropped the first letter or syllable of the Syriac Adon and formed their word Don or Lord as a title of nobility. And the English dropped the first of the Chaldee Adod and thus formed Dod, which was the old Saxon root of the German Gott, which is God, and of our present English God. Quote, note, this is me. Taylor doesn't demonstrate this, and while it could be correct due to the philological change between D and T, and perhaps D and G, it is more speculative as it is, so I'm not going to put my name on it. Just wanted to put that caveat.
Yeah, but a dad or a dod, we do get dad, or tat comes from there.
It was just the G, the goat, to say it's goat, a dod, goat, and goat were the same.
I don't know about that.
That's what I'm like saying. I don't know if I can, you probably could chase it down, but I didn't. It's just not pertinent to the subject right now. The attribute of riding upon the heavens is so particular, so distinctly marked, so incapable of being strained from its one and only apparent significancy that nothing but that obdurate stupidity which shuts out light and would say to itself, I will not see the sun, could cause any man to mistake as to what the significancy must have been. And the abbreviation of the name Jehovah into Yah is peculiarly applied to him who rideth upon the heavens. That is, the sun is precisely the same as the Aeolic or Latin abbreviation of the name Solus, that is, the alone, or the alone one, or the one by himself. Into Sol, that is, the sun, and abbreviated for the same reason, expressive of the same significancy, and devised to confine the utterance, as well as the thought, to the same strict notion of unity or oneness. And then he cites Deuteronomy 6:4. Here, in the Bible, it's written, O Israel, but we know that that's a Phoenician word for chronos, according to the father of ecclesiastical history, Eusebius, who cited Porphyry. So then it would follow, it's here, time, God of time. Hova is our deity, or Hova is our God. Hov is one. If you look at how they transliterate it in modern texts of Bibles, it's Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But if you look at what's next to Yov, it's not Kyrio this time. It's not Kiddos. It's Yova. So Yova is one, Yova is our God, and Yova is the God of time.
Go ahead and read that next line about the hidden one.
Yeah. So Jupiter is the hidden one. Jupiter,
Yova,
Amun.
Jupiter.
The same as Baal also means Lord. Baal Haman or Amun, spelled in Etrusco-Phoenician like I did earlier at the beginning, O-M-N, signifying God the first Father, the Son, is the alone one who rides at night and during winter. And that takes us back to that opening quote. Yov, how long will you hide your eternal wrath, which burns like fire? Psalm 89:46. And it says
so
that.
we're gonna look at some Jupiter Aman now. I got a couple images queued up because I think it's important context. And I mean, there's more that I could show, but I really want to accentuate the ram's horns that are part of Jupiter Aman. You see on the left, very clear, even reminds me a lot of like the Green Man symbolism too. And on the right, we have one that he even has the two heads of Janus or Janus. It's a two-headed god. So I feel like you could go looking up images of Moses right now if you were curious, and you'd see the exact same thing, the ram's horns. What do you got? What do you want to add to that, Dylan?
Well, you said the Green Man, so more appropriately, that's Kernunos, right? And even Kir, C-E-R, people say Cernunos, and that's what CERN is allegedly named after, but it's that Kir root. And the earliest inscription...
And K-R-N, like corn.
Kir, yep. And that is Kiren, which is horn, also light and radiance. But Kernunos, the earliest inscription of Kernunos is on the pillar of the boatman, which is Latin, not Scandinavian. Now they depict him with stag horns. Well, in the earliest, you'll see him with crab leg horns, just like Pontus, the archetype for the sea, on the pillar of the boatman.
The oldest
in Latin,
one.
the oldest, the
OG.
first.
So we may or may not completely agree with the following, but I think it's interesting to consider in the context of precession of the equinoxes. I'm going to read from Godfrey Higgins' Anacalypsis. He says, I consider Osiris, Bacchus, Astarte with the bull's head, Bull or Baal, Mithra, Adonis, Apis, and Buddha to have been contemporary or to have constituted one class of deity. She's talking about deities depicted with bull horns rather than ram's horns. In the same manner, I consider Hercules, Krishna, and Jupiter Aman, and Astarte with the ram's head to have been contemporary or to have formed a second class. My theory is strikingly confirmed by the fact, which I believe has not been noticed before, that the first classes are all taurocephaloi, or bull-headed. Buddha is closely allied or connected with the Siamese or Japanese bull, breaking the mundane egg with his horn, and was partly man, partly bull in Persia, as Mr. Faber has proved. And therefore, I conclude, and here's, by the way, image of that. This is a bull-horned Buddha, estimated from the 3rd millennium BC in Persia. So, therefore, I conclude with this, that these gods are nothing but the sun in the sign of Taurus at the vernal equinox, and the other classes are all hieroprosopoi, or pio. Sorry, let me try that again. Hieroprosopio, ram-headed, and are in like manner, for similar reasons, the sun in the sign of Aries at the vernal equinox. Several of those which were first bull-headed became ram-headed in later times. Aman, for example. In the histories of the births, deaths, funerals, and resurrections of all these gods, a striking similarity prevails, but yet there are some trifling discrepancies. These probably arose from the circumstance that one class refers to the adventures of the god's soul in the sign of the bull, the other to those of the god soul in the sign of the ram. The adoration of the bull still continued in most countries after the equinox had receded to Aries. This was the case in Egypt, where the Apis bull still continued, or Apis bull, though Ammon with his sheep's head arose. If he did not, as I believe he did, change his beeve's head for a ram. Here's a coin depicting Alexander the Great, if he ever actually existed, conqueror of Egypt, allegedly, with the horns of Ammon on his head. This is the thing you see with the coins of the ancient world that the modern scholars tell us represent this ruler or that king or that queen, when clearly the symbolism is religious symbolism, a deity. Maybe it's a deified human. Maybe that human never existed and they used these coins as evidence for some historical farrago that has no real grounds in reality. Hard to say. But Higgins continues and he says, Ammon meant the generative power of Am or Om. But as Am was the bull Mithra, Buddha, aka Buddha, therefore it must have changed. Astaroth or Astarte in Syria was first represented with the horns and head of a beeve, and in later times with those of a sheep. So here's a bull-headed Astarte said to be a Phoenician artifact right here. There's a work called Religion of the Semites by a guy named Robertson Smith. He quotes Deuteronomy 7:13, where the produce of the flock is called the Astaroth or Ashtaroth of the sheep. This is an antique expression that obviously has a religious origin. The sheep version of Aphrodite or Astaroth, Astarte, was especially worshipped in Cyprus, he says, where her annual sacrifice was a sheep. Sheep and goats are the flocks appropriate to eastern Palestine, while kine are more suitable to Phoenicia. Thus, in one place we may expect to find a sheep Astarte and in another a cow goddess. So I'm bringing these both up because there's one argument that the bull head and the ram's head represent a shift from processional ages. Another argument that's saying it depends on the culture of the region and what kind of animals they might have shepherded more commonly. He continues and he says, the Astarte of the northern Semites is a goddess of flocks, whose symbol and sacred animal is the cow, or among the sheep-raising tribes, the ewe. The sheep Astarte seems to have had its original home in Canaan. It is impossible to explain Deuteronomy 7:13 except by admitting that Astarte, in one of her types, had originally the form of a sheep, just as in other types, she was a dove or a fish. Now, we got to remember, going back especially to previous episodes like the Noah one, that the fish is a symbol of the ark, and so is the womb of the goddess, the destruction and recreation of the world, just like Jonah being in the belly of the whale is like Noah being in the ark. And also dove symbolism, especially with Astarte, is part of what helps us syncretize her to the Savior or Son of God androgynous archetype, because this particular goddess is said to have been crucified by a king whose name, Starabos, means cross. She's crucified and her spirit flies away in the form of a dove after her crucifixion. So I'm going to pause there. I got a little bit more before I kick it to Dylan, but if you want to comment on.
Yeah, just real quick. So I post something in the chat. If you want to pull it up, great. If not, you don't have to, just for your audience, but my audience should know what it is. So there's something in Italian culture called Ieratura, and that is the significance of the bullhorn symbolism, warding off evil. That's actually the origin. So people would hang up like bull's horns in front of their shops and homes, all that stuff. It's to ward off evil. So when you look at like the guy who created the symbol that people throw up for rock and roll, it was because his Italian grandma would do that to him to ward off the, like you're evil, warding that off. And that's like the evil eye and all that shit. And so he started doing it as a joke to the crowd as he's playing music, like, you motherfuckers are evil, like having fun with it. That's what started that sign. But previously, So again, we have more symbolism that can be attributed to Italy, and you can have more context to that. If I'm correct in my suspicion that Phoenicians, which there's no history, there's no nation in the world that ever called themselves Phoenicians or any of that stuff. That name comes from Greeks who, in their limited interaction with them along a small tract of land in the Eastern Mediterranean, presume that that's where they were from. But if you look at that region, it doesn't really provide the things you'd need to be a maritime race. If you just look at the landscape, it doesn't have the resources. So when you look at the Phoenician language, how I showed you earlier, if you can read Etruscan, you can read Aman in Phoenician. And so when you look at, if it's true that Astarte is a Phoenician archetype, well, then that would mean it's a Celtic archetype because the Etruscans are Celtic.
That's right.
And then when you look at that name differently, it would be Astar. If you just look up like O'Reilly's Irish Dictionary, right? It's a free resource at the archive. Astar means, Astar means journey, and then Te means person. So that literal archetype is probably a protection for people who are on journeys. And that would be my caveat.
I find it interesting that we find Deuteronomy 7:13 calling the firstborn produce of the flock the newborn lamb, if you will, an Ashtaroth, right? Because that betrays a Etrusco-Phoenician Celtic origin to the Old Testament there.
And even Roth is wheel. Rota, Roth in Irish. They don't pronounce the TH, so it's just Rot, right? But Mazaroth, Mazarot, the reaping wheel, harvest wheel.
I didn't have time to look around the context of Deuteronomy chapter 7 for more evidence, but just at a glance with the eyes to see that we've developed here, if we're talking about the Ashtaroth or the star wheel of the flock or the sheep, we're probably I bet we'd be able to pull out more context from that biblical chapter to say that we're looking at an astrotheological representation of the sun in Aries here.
And just in case someone in the audience in this free section doesn't know what you just did there, Aster is also star in Greek.
So I'm going to read a little bit more because we just looked at this Persian Buddha, bullhorned Buddha. I wanted to read from George Faber, Origin of Pagan Idolatry, one of my favorites. What he writes about the Persian system, he says,
he's really good.
He's really good.
You just got to ignore the religious connotations and he's fire.
Yeah. His research is awesome. All the stuff I ever chased down that he cites has been legit. Him and Higgins, two of my favorites. So he says, as it is set forth in the Zend Avesta, the god Ormuzd created the world, not indeed in 6 days, but what is very similar to it, at 6 different intervals. During its first period were created the heavens, during the second, the waters. The third was allotted to the production of the earth, the fourth to the formation of trees and vegetables. During the fifth, the various tribes of animals, aerial, sylvan, and aquatic, received their essence, and in the sixth space of time, in almost exact conformity with the Mosaical cosmogony, was devoted solely to the creation of man. This was the most honorable of all the productions of Ormuzd, and the person so produced, the general father of the human race, was compounded of a man and a bull. That being was succeeded by a second bull man, a reappearance of the first, who flourished at the period of a universal deluge. The preceding cosmogony bears a striking and curious resemblance to that of the ancient Etrurians, a singular race of men who were nearly allied to the Hindus and Egyptians, and from whom the Romans seem to have borrowed the most mysterious and recondite part of their theology. We are informed by Suidas that a sage of that nation, Etruria, wrote a history in which it is said that God created the world in 6,000 years, and appointed the same period of time to be the extent of its duration. In the first millenary or chiliad, he made the heaven and the earth, and in the second, the visible firmament, in the third, the sea and all the waters that are in the earth, in the fourth, the sun and the moon, and the stars, in the fifth, every living soul of birds, reptiles, and quadrupeds, which have their abode either in the air, on the land, or in the waters, and lastly, in the sixth, man alone. So we have here, if Suidas is to be believed, that one of the oldest cultures that we have any archaeological record for, with the oldest written language, if Dylan's research points, to the truth about that, then the whole Genesis story does seem to be an Etruscan story, especially given the context, whether it's the Genesis story of the Zendavesta or the Old Testament, right? But given the context of the Bible, and I don't have it in front of me, but I've covered it off in other times or places, that there's language in the Old Testament around the idea of a day of the Lord being like 1,000 years. It's just not explicitly said in Genesis 1 when they're giving the cosmogony. But in the context of the Old Testament as a whole, you can actually apply this idea of a chiliad, or a period of 1,000 years, to each day of creation. So I'll have to dig that up. Maybe I'll find it while we're talking, but I have come across that before. I've covered that off before. My point being, if the Persian system is a version of Buddhism, and the Zendavesta has these millenary chiliad 1,000 year periods in the cosmogony, and the Etruscans are the origin of that, some pretty potent, strings tying everything back to the Italian peninsula.
And for those who are, again, you may be coming across this on YouTube or wherever this goes for your first time. The reason this matters is because it is impossible that Latin, Celtic, and Sanskrit aren't from the same source. And it's well known that Latin is a lingua franca, and it's demonstrable, a lingua franca, from where you find it, which is the Italian peninsula. And the only reason you can translate some things or get the meaning of some things in Etruscan writing is because you'll find those words in some other form of Latin, but it has no affinity to Indo-European. So it follows logically that if Latin is the offspring or offshoot of Etruscan, then so too must Celtic and Sanskrit be. And then could you bring up, just because we're on this right now? Oh, and so I want to just put this caveat. I don't necessarily think the story was of Etruscan origin or anything like that. Because when I look at Etruscan inscriptions, there's nothing in the historical record that mentions any of this stuff. But what you do see is that this is probably a creation of people in the Middle Ages who are still drawing from their own ancient past and own ancient archetypes to create this shit, to present it to the modern people of their day as this ancient history. But they really just drew from their own ancient history and kind of reinvented it. And so could you just bring up so the people could see this? Right where we just left off, where it says like Jove is the eternal fire, the sun. Well, right below that, there's a screenshot of Psalm 90, verse 1. And if you could bring that up, it's right beneath a quote that says, Adonis, you reckoned the boundary or circle of all houses.
Here it is.
Great. Now, I'm going to translate this different than what people are going to think about this, because I'm going to show you that the word used is dur, which is dalet vav resh, which is dur, and it signifies circle, similar to how guard signifies boundary or circle enclosing place, like in Asgard, right? The boundary of the sun, the boundary of As, who is Isus or Isar. Anyways, if you look at that, you'll see right next to it where it says a prayer of Moses, the man of God, Lord. It's A, Aleph, Dalet, D, Nun, N, I, Adonai. That's literally Adonis without the S. You have been our dwelling place in all generations. And if you go to the next one, It says, it's Psalm 90, verse 2. It says, before the mountains were born, you gave birth to the earth around the world. Even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. But everlasting to everlasting, I think that's, again, this is the issue with translation, whereas the context, which is that it's from, I think it means from before the beginning till after the end, you are God, rather than from everlasting to everlasting. It just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to put that in there. And if you go to the next one, you can see how it says circle, is circle, ball, or dwelling. And so that could signify any of those. So there's a lot of liberty that needs to be taken in when people translate. And that's why translation is so dangerous, is because you have to do it in order to get the context of what they're saying in another language. But in doing it, you just have to take so many liberties that you really can't cling to things. It's not wise to cling to things when it comes to translation, because, you know, as you and I have both found and talked about recently, it's just people take whatever liberties they want to convey the message that they want to.
So I have a synchronicity for you, though, that's kind of blowing my mind. I just mentioned I was going to look for where this one day to God is 1,000 years to us. And you then next thing you're bringing up Psalm chapter or book 90 verses 1 and 2. Well, the verse I was looking for was Psalm 90 verse 4. So literally just right there, like the next thing for what you brought up in the exact spot of the Bible is what I was going to bring up, where it says, for 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. And that is something that particularly Jews, when they're talking about their calendar system, that they liken that, or they interpret that to mean 1,000 years here as a day to God. So that trips me out. Like, makes me think we're onto something, that we have such a gnarly synchronicity of all of the books of the Old Testament, chapters and verses, that it was the same one I was looking for 2 verses later.
It's wild. You know, you run into this all the time, and, you know, it can be dangerous or intoxicating, because it does give you that special feeling. Woo! Like, oh, I'm being like, this means it's true. But, you know,
that's not evidence, though.
For me, take
the spark of it and run with it. Don't make claims based on it, but definitely grab the spark. I hope you guys are feeling a spark off of that synchronicity. My God. Thank you, God. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, all glory to God. It is really that's going again. There's a lot of things like that. Seek and ye shall find. The glory of God to conceal a thing, and the glory or the honor of kings to search out a matter. You know, there is that, whether that's true or not, literally, there is a pattern that people who are sages have noticed regarding this, and that's it. And that's where these synchronistic ideas develop, because it's hard to ignore that stuff. Even if it's coincidence or it's meaningless, it's really hard to ignore it.
For sure. All right, Dylan, take us down to the end of the free section for your article. We're getting towards the point where we're going to cross over to members only.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. But like the word, if you can bring up 92 one more time, we can just focus on how it says, like, you gave birth to the earth and the world, but the world is, you know, it's Tevel, and that's well known. Embedded in that, the Greek equivalent is cosmos, and the Latin equivalent is mundus. This is the world of the cosmos. It's not necessarily the world like the world we live in. It's like the whole solar system, if you will, or universe system, whatever that is.
It's also Tubal.
Yeah, Tubal.
Which is where we get the idea of it being a craft, like it's crafted. You know, it's a work of a craft, just like cosmos and mundi or mundus mean a beauty derived from order, you know, like adornment, crafting, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so that's, you know, and that's basically all I had to lay down on that. And just to, you know, it's really useful to pull up the text in the original language that they're drawing from, because you'll see once you know this system that I teach. And if for anyone who sees this, if any of this feels like too advanced from you, I walk you through the process. So if you just go in progression of Spirit Whirled series from 1 through 6, and then dive into the Real Universal Empire, I take you through a progression so you can develop this. But when you see that, that's why it's important to learn the Imani. Yeah,
that's how I got started.
I mean, it's just my journey. It's really just like how I learned about it. I organized it in a way that this is what I learned at this point, and how I progressed. And when you look at these words, you can see the Imanian radicals, which are the hidden radicals, technically, of the sun script, Sanskrit, Sanctus Scriptum, the Holy Writ, the Holy Script. You can see it for yourself, and then you can see that, these English translations, a lot of them are totally ignorant of this system, which is why they're translating it one way and not another way. And if you don't want to be confused, it's good to learn this stuff if these sort of things intrigue you. And if not, it's still fun to learn it because it's useful for learning other languages that are still present today. But, again, do you need to go through this stuff if you're not really interested in priestcraft? Probably not. But if you wanted to just history alone and how European history has been covered up, the Real Universal Empire is the way to go that I would recommend. And all of these are available to my paid members on my Substack now.
Yeah, the other day I went out to lunch with my buddy Tom and his family, and he was talking about going through all these Interworld shows, listening to your audiobooks, reading them as text as well. I think he's gone through the whole Spirit World series at least once, and maybe twice, or maybe he's working through it a second time. But we're sitting there at lunch, and we're talking about this Aman subject, and he's making observations back to me, things he's noticed that I've never heard of before, thought of before. He's just as competent at seeing this stuff and weaving with this stuff as anybody. He could be up here sitting here talking with us because he took the time to go through the Spirit World series, and he's been going through our Inner World podcast more than once. And there's real value there. So I bring that up.
It's got the best replay value, because what happens is you learn about this stuff on your own.
That's literally what he said. He's like, going through the second time, it was like clicking more.
Yeah. Because what happens is you go off on your own and you learn a bunch of things. And then when you revisit, you can actually see, that's what was being referred to. And I didn't get that at the time, or I didn't realize it was that expansive at the time. It's an amazing, I'm very grateful, and I don't even take credit for it. All glory to God. I just did what I did, and I felt called to do it. And, now I feel called to just kind of withdraw a little bit and just go back to more historical context. And that's what I'm really enjoying right now, is just looking at how can I use this for ancient history to help people in that field. And really, it is all just about helping people. It's not really about, I'm not here to dictate, this is how it is and this is what happened. But I can I can with certainty get you to realize that, okay, what I'm told happened is not true. Now, how can I how can I reorganize this in a responsible way without making things up? And that is where my frustration comes in, because I think a lot of people will agree that it's not as we were told, but then they go off and how many people still write about Atlantis as though Atlantis was real and all this other shit. And they just make all these other things that are not in the historical record the subject of their work. And they do the same thing that the people we exposed did. They make shit up as they go. Now, that being said, I have an article that's scheduled to come out where I concede that if there was an Atlantis, it probably was in Mauritania, and it probably was I can see how the Rishat structure does make sense because it's Mount Atlas.
Did you check out Jack's documentary, The Atlantis Puzzle?
No, but because
pretty interesting.
The thing about it is all of this is subsequent to the original stories. And that's my point, is you're naming these locations after Atlas. So I get how the modern scholars are looking at these locations and saying, it must have happened here. There's a Mount Taurus. There's all these things that are named subsequent to the stories, to the astrotheological priestcraft. But my point is, you're drawing from stuff that you didn't realize it was priestcraft and reascribed to historical places that are now called that, but originally it wasn't that. And that's hard to articulate. So
just like the planets, they were not named after the gods.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the historical record. And so if you're interested in that from a historical perspective, that my work will pay dividends for you if you are going to go to a location and do that real work and say, okay, I know for a fact that this was named after these archetypes, but what is this location telling me about what it actually was in the prehistorical record, meaning before we really had the written accounts? Because it seems that the historical accounts really just come into play with the Greeks. Whereas the other races, though they used the letters, they weren't writing all this fantasy and poetry and stuff, which makes me wonder, well, if they came after the Greeks, why didn't they copy? Why didn't they inherit that? And why can't you translate their languages? And why is there so little known about them? And why is everything about them lost? Well, I think it's because what we think of as the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire to a degree is a fabrication of the Middle Ages. And I don't think all this stuff is as old. I think it's their way of trying to fill in the gaps and tell people what happened in history and make sense of it, rather than letting the locations tell you what they say. And that's the challenge of archaeology. And even that's just going to be as much guesswork as translating. So it's all guesswork.
And then there's the ancient practice of judicial astrology, which wasn't just about forecasting the future, but also telling history by reading the star script. That's something John McHugh's work has demonstrated really powerfully. So, I mean, that was the practice when setting up a new nation or empire and justifying the divine right of its rulership for possibly millennia, to make up a story, make up a history out of the archetypes in the language of the sky. So when that's what we're up against, and the credulous scholars of the last several hundred years are reading the ancient histories and the Homers and whatnot and trying to figure out, okay, how can we make the artifacts fit to this story? They're going about it backwards, trying to fit the historical physical record to a mythology, rather than trying to just throw out the mythology, kind of look at that more in the symbolic level, the religious level, rather than, it's not necessarily anything true to it.
And I'm looking at this almost like from an MMA perspective or something. I'm just trying to force the status quo into submission to admit they don't know. Because I think everybody getting to that base level of conceding we don't know will be more valuable for us as a whole than everybody fighting over what they think is true.
Well, spiritually, that's the difference between being in denial and bearing false witness and being in truth and in a higher potential state. So like it's literally important on our physical, emotional, spiritual health level to get out of this denial. And
if you don't know, that's fine, right? If you don't know, that's fine. And if you suspect or believe, that's fine. But if you can at least force the status quo, I'm not talking about every little person, but like the status quo to concede that, hey, we don't know. It's all guesswork. We're doing our best. Then what it does is it relieves the tension that people have who talk about things as though they do know, and then they refer to, see, this authority says this. And that's really what my goal is just to force basically the status quo into submission to conceding that they don't know and that a lot of shit has been made up about history.
If your work ever saw a larger audience, it wouldn't be a submission. It would be a knockout. So come join us on the other side. Join Dylan's Substack, greattide.substack.com to get access, or my Patreon or my YouTube channel membership. All that's linked in the show notes, patreon.com/innerverse. You're going to be best served joining both of our paywalls, because aside from this material, we both have our own independent content that is members only, and in many ways just as valuable to this work. Although I'll be honest, it's the most fun when me and you bring our research together, and most of our research is going to be on the other side of this break here. So come and join, enjoy it. It's going to be a good one.
And for those who do support us, thank you. We appreciate it. And, you know, we are up against a lot of, everyone has a lot of options. So anytime you could, if you really wanted to help us, the best way you can do, I don't really care about the likes and all that stuff, but being able to just share it, right? Just share it. That's one of the best ways to get us out into the algorithms. And so if you do enjoy the content, even if you think you don't have a lot of subscribers or connections, whatever, just share it, because you never know. You know, there's someone that had a good quote. He says, it's not about how many people watch you, it's who watches you. And you never know who's
Quality
watching
over
you.
Quantity.
And you never know who has the means to get us to the next level, who would just be in you wouldn't even know they're interested in this stuff, but because you shared it and they just randomly clicked on it, they found it interesting, it turns into something. That's how our work is going to develop a voice, because right now we don't have a voice because we don't have a big enough audience. And so when we put out content, it doesn't ripple. It's like throwing a pebble into a pond, whereas some people have a boulder, right? So it's like they put out content. It doesn't matter how insignificant it is. It makes a massive splash. Well, that's what we're trying to do, but in a way that's beneficial.
Amen. Or should I say aman?
Amun.
Okay. See you guys, members, on the other side.